Hello and welcome to another episode of Project Sanity. It's September 1st, 2016, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to be speaking with a candidate for Superintendent of Public Schools in Washington State, Chris Reykdal. We had Aaron Jones on last week, his opponent, and we are going to be covering. We had Dave in California meet up with Jill Stein, so we've got some great coverage of that event. We're also going to be speaking with a guest from the Dakota Pipeline protests, and we're going to get some more information about what's been going on down there. And we've got some big announcements for the end of the show, hopefully, and so we will get into that. But first, we've got Chris with us right away, so we are going to get right into talking with Chris. Again, Chris is running for the office of Superintendent of Public Schools in Washington State, and so we have him here. I'll let him go ahead and tell us a little bit about himself. So, Chris, I just want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for joining us so much. We really appreciate it. And just tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Hey, thanks for having me. What a great opportunity. This is a pretty amazing evolution in what's happening politically in our country. And I feel like when I ran for the legislature 6 years ago, my entire campaign was about income inequality and the particular regressivity of our tax code in Washington. Had the huge support of labor in this. And so to see what has happened in the last 6 years and some of the work that you folks are doing grassroots nationally and in each of the states is pretty powerful. So again, thanks for having me. I'm Chris Reykdal. I'm leaving my House seat in the Washington State Legislature to run for Superintendent of Public Schools, as you heard. The role is pretty straightforward. Our state sends all of the money to our schools through an office that I'm seeking, the superintendent's office, and then out to our local 295 school districts. So there's an enormous need there for financial competency and all that stuff, but also setting policies so that there's equity in our schools, so that districts are getting equal resources, but beyond equal, they're getting resources. And one of the things that I think is emerging in our state is that, ironically, more money is following wealthy communities than it is the communities most in need. And so we've got big issues in our state, as do others. Our tax code magnifies it unbelievably. We have the most regressive tax code in the country. We're heavily reliant on sales tax and a business and occupation tax. So if you're a Washington resident and you're very wealthy, you pay less than 3% of your disposable income in taxes because we have no income tax at all or capital gains tax. If you're very low income, if you're a recent immigrant, if you're a struggling family, you pay closer to 16 or 17% taxes in our state. So our entire education system is built on the wrong basis. The people who need the most resources get the least, but they're paying the most into the system. So that's a huge challenge for us, and it's part of the reason I ran. I was born and raised in our state. I went to public schools my whole life. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. We grew up on public assistance. And candidly, it was pretty tough. My oldest 6 siblings spent some time in the foster care system. So I have this real sense that there's a purpose for government to wrap around vulnerable families, and then it's public education that really can lift families out of poverty and give people the opportunity. And that's what broke the cycle for me. That's what gave me the shot that I've had. And so I went on to be a teacher and a school board member. And for the last 14 years, I've been with our community and technical college system. It doesn't get a lot of credit, but they are the workhorse of higher education in our state, and it's a pretty amazing system. So thanks again for having me. I know we'll get into some issues here. That's a little bit about me, but you guys are doing incredible work, and thanks a lot.
Oh, absolutely. We're, again, thankful to have you on, and that's an interesting story, and I appreciate you sharing with us a little bit of background about yourself. And so one of the questions, and you kind of touched on it a little bit in there, and I just wanted to have you expand on it a little bit, is you mentioned the financial competency aspect of it. What roles do you see the superintendent position playing in the education system in our state, and what kind of, and where do you plan on taking it, I suppose?
Yeah, so we can't get to the kind of equity that we need in this state unless we have a really honest conversation about the way we fund our schools. And in Washington State, as some of you know who are online here, we are increasingly dependent on local property taxes. So very wealthy communities pay very low tax rates, but they generate a lot of money per child, and they have incredible opportunities. If you're a rural Washingtonian, or you live in a property poor community, you have very high tax rates, but you don't generate very much money per child, And so that fundamentally creates inequity. You talk about the need for before school programs, after school programs, interventions, family outreach coordinators, all of the stuff we're trying to do with opportunity gaps in race and the LGBTQ community and low-income communities and our tribal communities. All of that opportunity hinges upon getting this revenue question and this finance question right. And we just have a long ways to go. So I've said that at OSPI, given my background in finance, I want to change the conversation. And I want to deliver a bipartisan approach to this thing to the legislature as a starting point so that they feel like somebody in the constitutional office of OSPI is trying to get to a solution here that's more equitable by geography and by poverty status in our communities. I think I have the background to do that. I'm committed to delivering that plan. It won't be the plan that passes in the end. Partisan politics will be partisan politics, and they'll work on it in the legislature. But I just think we're beyond the era where we all complain about it not working, but then not offering up solution, and I intend to deliver a plan to them if I'm elected.
That's an excellent answer. And I do wonder, I know the economic aspect of it, and you say that basically the reality of the situation is that we don't have a solution immediately on the horizon that's going to get passed through the partisan legislature. So with knowing that we're only going to be able to address part of that issue, there's also other aspects to the separation in the economics and the education that people are receiving. So with the quality of the educators and the experience of the educators in the different districts and how that plays a role, I'd wonder how does your plan address some of those aspects of it?
Yeah, that's excellent. So when you dive into this thing, as you just indicated, not only is there an injustice in the tax code and the way we send the money out by district, but we don't have the money necessarily following the greatest need. So where we have the greatest need, we should be thinking about changing formulas and creating incentives. And so classic example is when you're in a high poverty community or a community with low graduation rates, that's the place where we need to be investing and creating incentives for educators to come in, more intensive resources, bringing down student-faculty ratios, more counselor advisors, more parent outreach, candidly more substance abuse, more family planning efforts. Like the comprehensive whole child stuff has to follow the communities most in need. And so my plan does include that. It's not going to be comfortable for some folks because instead of just rolling out the money based on every single kid who walks through a school door with a backpack, you will see money being driven out to communities that need it the most. I had a role to play this last session in passing what we call our EOG bill, Equal Opportunity Gap bill. It's been years and years in the making. And quite frankly, our communities most impacted by the work we have to do have known what to do for a long time. My job this year was to get some very privileged lawmakers, I think, to understand that there's a big economic incentive for doing the right thing for vulnerable communities. And the message I always tell people is when a kid drops out of school, it's rarely because they can't do math or science. It's because something else is happening in their life. And when they drop out, it's $370,000 in lost lifetime earnings for that individual. And it's another $300,000 impact to taxpayers because of the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, and the social safety net. So as a kid who grew up on public assistance, I was on track to being one of those students who was eventually going to cost myself $400,000 and my fellow taxpayers $300,000. But my community invested in me and invested in other kids who struggle at times, and it made the difference. So you've nailed this. It's not just about getting new money, but it's also getting money in the right places. And I think we can do that if we're sincere about the outcome. The politics of it are enormous, as you well know. But what other fight is more worthy than this one?
Nice. I'm curious about you've mentioned your background in growing up in poverty. I'm wondering, and you're talking about getting the resources out to the communities that need it the most. Oftentimes, what's left out when that rhetoric is used among the political class in general are communities of color. So, what kind of personal experiences do you have in communities of color that help you understand what they specifically need beyond the financial resources, but the additional resources that they could be using to offer better educations to their students?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question because these conversations are intersectional, as the word has become. You can't talk about poverty without having a more meaningful conversation about race in our state and across the country, about ethnicity, about our LGBTQ friends, um, whether it's homelessness or suicide rates or you name the demographic. These numbers are up in communities most vulnerable, and it goes well beyond poverty, so I appreciate that. So my experience really as a child was not in a tremendously diverse community that I grew up in. It's that through substance or alcohol abuse, my parents eventually got on a recovery program and became sponsors to a lot of folks. And they spent a lot of time, my mom in particular, as a sponsor for other recovering alcoholics at the Confederated Tribes of the Tulalip. So a lot of interaction with tribal communities up in Snohomish County. It was my first orientation to understanding that though I was poor, I had enormous privilege as a white male. And my parents, I don't think, knew that when they were struggling, but they sure came to understand that as they reached out and helped other vulnerable communities. So that sort of launched a lot of my work. Our community technical college system, as I mentioned, I've been with for 14 years. It is the most diverse higher ed system in the state. And so in that, I've been able to help launch opportunity grants, opportunity scholarships. I got a bill passed for the first time in our state and maybe in the country that gives financial aid specifically to low-income students, particularly rural students, and specifically Latino Hispanic students disproportionately, who are trying to take college credit while they're in high school as a pathway to success, because there are still huge financial barriers even for high school students to do that. So I've tried to bring my privilege to a place where I can bring greater equity to folks, and I've been honored to work in some systems that have done that very well, and quite frankly, with some failure as well. So,
All right. And one of the other questions I wanted to ask before I open it up to the rest of the group is your opponent is Erin Jones, and we spoke with her last week. And one of the questions I had was, what is it that sets you apart from your opponent, and that makes you feel like that you're uniquely qualified to fulfill this role? And then, regardless of the outcome, in what ways do you see that you could possibly work together in accomplishing your common goals?
yeah, that's an excellent question. So what we hear around the state is, wow, what a race. Like a lot of times people feel in politics like they don't have great choices. And in this, I really think they do. Two very passionate people, pretty, I would say, dynamic speakers, and both coming from an incredible place in their heart that brings them a desire to serve. I'll never touch Erin's cultural competence work and her equity understanding. I don't try. It's not appropriate. What I would say is a difference, though, is if you haven't lived in poverty, if you haven't felt sort of the shame of purchasing things with food stamps and sort of struggle and judgment, it is sometimes hard to relate to 400,000 Washington kids across race and ethnicity who struggle in poverty. And I've lived it, so in some ways I feel like I connect with kids in a way that I think sometimes you can only experience by living it a little bit. The other thing is just experience for that role. We were both in a classroom, Erin for 6 or 8 years and me for less than that even. But the job is chief executive officer, so a graduate degree in finance and years as an executive in the college system and then the policy-making world of the legislature. I think those are huge things when it comes to being successful in that role. And so our experiences are different. I just think she brings a better understanding of local school districts in some cases. I think I bring a much bigger strength and background in actually running as an executive and kind of shaping the culture of a large state agency, interacting with the legislature, and doing it in a way that I think personally connects me with kids who have struggled financially. But two great candidates.
Excellent. And what Chris is mentioning, for those who didn't watch our show with Aaron, that it's a top two system in Washington, and as a result, it's two Democrats that we are choosing between, and so we are lucky in that. So you guys both had impressive performances in the primary, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to some of our other commentators. I'll let you guys. Looks like Adair and Eric are both ready, so I'll pass it off to Adair first, or actually, you know what? Let me give it to Eric first, please, if I could, if that's all right with you, Dave. And then we'll bring in Adair shortly. We'll let Eric get a question in at least.
Yeah, so one of the advantages we had with having Aaron on last week and then kind of getting the word out that we were going to have you on this week, Chris, was we had a lot of comments on Facebook with comments about each of you, and also some people were like, "Hey, ask Chris this question," and those type of things. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I would like for you to elaborate if you could. So I had a question. In particular, there is a lot of concern, and there's always a lot of concern, and for good reason, about specifically about the treatment of Native American children and children who are on the reservations. And honestly, if I'm honest with you, I kind of don't understand how that system works entirely, whether or not their funding for those schools comes from a different place. So I was wondering if you could explain how we can better serve those students, and then also even give us a little background on how the funding for those students work, whether or not they're going to the same public schools. I know personally I went to school with a lot of Native Americans, some great friends, but I don't know if reservations have their own types of schools. So basically, how do you think we can help Native Americans in general? Because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about underserved communities, we don't. A lot of people don't associate Native Americans, or as Dave likes to say, and I like it a lot, original Americans.
Mm-hmm.
How we can better serve those communities.
Yeah, what a great question. So let's start with the financing because it's fairly simple. Most of the tribal students in our state are going to area and community schools established by regular traditional public school systems, elected school boards. They just happen to be in the same geography, so they attend their area schools. And the money goes to that school based on student population. As more students show up, the district gets more money. Our state does allow tribal compact schools. So our state is one that our school districts can form their own tribal schools on reservation lands or in Indian country that primarily serves the tribal community. Some of our reservations have done that. Some of our tribes have done that. Most of them have not yet, but I think they're all sort of trying to figure out, does the economics of that work? Is it the right thing for our students? Can we get the faculty and staff that we need? So I think these are enormously successful when they're done well. One of the policy implications here is that they want to make sure that when they go out and recruit teachers that they can get just absolutely incredible talent. So they want to make sure that the pension system comes over with a teacher who leaves the traditional system for a tribal compact school, that the healthcare systems are adequate. These are enormous if we're going to create the equity that's necessary. I'll also say that this is a group still in the shadows, and I think it's horrific because, as you have indicated in your question, these are our native communities who were here literally tens of thousands of years before white populations came here. And we know the historical implications of oppression and the reservation system when it was done very, very poorly, some failures by the federal government. So to this day, there's about a 30 or 35% lower graduation rate amongst our students in tribal communities than our Caucasian students, Native American or Asian students, or even African American and Latinx students. So it's a big, big, enormous gap in our understanding. So some of the things we can do is empower our compact schools. We can get resources to follow, as I said earlier, to communities that need it the most, because let's be honest, our tribal reservations in many cases were put on some of the worst land in some of the worst places. They were absolutely targeted for inadequate resources, so they're property poor in some cases. So when you rely on local property taxes to fund schools, well, guess who generates the least amount of money per student? So big structural changes can address that. And as I said earlier, whole child approach. It's not enough to just send more money to a school in a community that serves a lot of tribal students. Where are the comprehensive wraparound supports for family support, for alcohol and drug support? Where are the foster care systems? Tribal communities are much heavier users of the foster care system. So it's a long answer to tell you that you've hit the right question. There are legitimate things we can do in the short term to support our tribal communities, and then some of it is long-term work and recognizing our tribes as sovereign governments, completely completely eligible to govern themselves, but with partnership with the state and support from our state. And I've been proud to do some of that work. This last year, I got $41,000 to support our tribal curriculum that our school districts are required to use with fidelity to support the teaching of our cultural history as local as possible is basically what the law says. So don't go grab the history of the Plains Indians when you're talking about the Snohomish tribe in our state. Go find the history of that tribe in that community and teach those kids in that community that local history. That's some of the work I did this year to get it stabilized financially. So appreciate the question. It's huge.
Yeah. Thank you for your detailed answer. And I just have another two-part question. I know Adair also received some Facebook feedback the last week, and he's got some questions too. But before we get to Adair, so I wanted a two-part question, and I think that these two things kind of tie together pretty well. So the first would be about how you feel about charter schools, and the second would be alternative schools, which I actually graduated from an alternative high school. Again, I also came from a low-income, impoverished family, and because we moved so much, that was the easiest way for me to stay at the same high school, was to go to the alternative school so that I didn't have to keep switching schools. So first, if you could touch on how you feel about charter schools, and second, your opinion with alternative high schools and whether either can be useful or if you think either are just taking away from funding that could be going to regular high schools.
No, it's a great question. I want to actually start with the alternative schools because they are the lifesaver for so many kids. And I think what's happening in our state and around the country is we're increasingly suggesting that every single student needs to go to a university. And in that world, we're marginalizing a lot of students who learn differently, who need a different kind of contact, who quite frankly are working and need a more flexible schedule or a more flexible geography. So I'm a huge proponent of alternative schools and magnet schools and innovation schools, and our state law provides for a lot of this. We have a couple in the district where I was a school board member, in our community where I've been a legislator. These are lifesavers for students, and they're getting better and better and better in terms of quality. What we have to do is stop thinking about them as second-tier systems. When a student needs an alternative school because of life circumstances, that is a great thing, and we should embrace it. When they want to go to one of our skill centers to learn a technical program, where they are applying all the same math and science skills, but they're doing it in an applied way through welding or construction trades, we should embrace it. Instead, we treat these things like they're second-tier systems or one-off systems, and that's part of the problem culturally within our education system. I want to make sure you all can still hear me because I just got a disruption here on my phone.
Oh yeah, we're good. We can hear you. It just cut your camera out for a second, but you're good to go.
Okay, and as for charters, let's be pretty clear about that. I don't think the system in our state is still legal. So what I've been trying to make pretty clear to folks is that if you want innovative schools, they quite frankly have to run through a school board. You need an accountability system through a local school board. The way our law runs today is that an unelected board approves a charter, and an unelected board runs the charter. It is very much a private system, no matter what labels we use. It's a private system using public taxpayer money, and I don't personally think it's legal in our state. We have a common schools requirement that essentially says you need an elected school board in that process, or an elected body, so that the voters and the taxpayers have a butt to kick if something goes wrong. So I'm not a supporter. I gave the closing speech this year in opposition to the charter school bill. I know why people want them, but the data is not very clear that they're more effective. And the data is really clear that when it's gone poorly in other states and in other places, taxpayers lost out on a lot of accountability. The NAACP has recently asked for a moratorium nationally on charter schools. I think that's powerful. The National Labor Relations Board just this week said, listen, these are not public schools. We're going to treat them like private employers for the purposes of collective bargaining. So we got a big conversation to have in this country, and I don't want to vilify the parents or the kids who are a part of this, but I want to continue to raise questions about the privatization of vital public services like schools or the prison system or our natural resources or our highways, because we're losing the taxpayer accountability in this by our constant thirst for profit. And it's causing communities who are already very marginalized to be more marginalized and to get less resources. So as somebody who has opposed every single trade agreement where I could from the power places I've been, which certainly isn't Congress, but as a legislator and as a citizen, and I do oppose TPP, by the way, aggressively, this is all connected. All of this is connected. All of this is about trying to take a system that used to be designed to serve citizens and make it a system that is first and foremost about profit and capital markets. And then if it serves people along the way, well, then those folks are okay with it. But they are driving to a very different answer than the question. The question should be, how do we serve students effectively? But they're asking the question, how do we turn all these things into private market opportunities? And I think it's the wrong question. And charters begin to go down that route, which is why I'm extremely skeptical, even though I understand why some parents want them.
Yeah, I had no idea that they did put out that notice against charter schools. That's interesting to hear. So thanks for bringing that to light. So I just have one follow-up question from a comment that I got from someone watching the video when we were talking about how to better serve Native American students, and he said he wanted to know about allowing them to practice their own cultural traditions within the school districts, and your opinion on that and how we can allow that.
Yeah, because again, they're sovereigns, and I really believe that they deserve the dignity and respect of a sovereign nation, which is that they can choose to run their school system, particularly when they become compact schools, in the way that they want. So including language, including culture, including religious ceremony. Now, I would not say the same thing for our regular public schools because I believe so deeply in separation of church and state. But in the case of our tribal communities, these are sovereigns. We have to respect the fact that they effectively act as their own nations, and therefore they get to write their own rules. And of course, we have a shared obligation to have students meet standard and all that, and I know they will. So they deserve the dignity of their own culture in their own schools.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. I was trying to make sure nobody could hear me, I guess. Just kidding. So I've had the floor for a second now, so I do have some more questions, but Adair's been sitting there, having to sit there quiet for the last half hour, and Adair's not used to being quiet. So I think if Dave's ready to get Adair on to ask some questions, we can switch over to him. I'm sure everybody's tired of seeing my mug anyway.
There you are, Adair.
Hey, folks. And hi, Chris. It's nice to meet you. I've had the opportunity to meet Aaron earlier, but I want to read a couple of statistics really quick. One especially poignant to me as it's from the year I graduated. So that you know, I'm from South Tacoma. I went to Oakwood Elementary School, Lockburn, and then Baker Middle Schools, Mount Tahoma High School. The first word that comes to mind for a lot of people when they hear Tacoma Public High Schools is dropout factories. And here's a good statistic to back that up. The graduation rate for Tacoma, class of 2010, the year I graduated high school, was 55.3%. And in one of the only areas where you have a majority of students of color in classes that were illegal, even from my teacher saying, hey, we've got 40 kids in a math class, this is unsustainable. Teachers, like my junior year of math, taking Algebra 3, who, if you were caught talking in the class before the class started, flat out said, well, I'm just not going to help you because you obviously know what you're talking about. And this wasn't just in the junior level of math. Freshman year taking algebra, I told one of my counselors, well, I had such and such teacher for math, and the response I got was, oh, I'm really sorry you had that, because that teacher played solitaire as opposed to teaching math. Now, to jump to, I believe this is for the class of 2015, we've jumped up to 82.6% for the same school district, the same schools, with this idea that we're going to make sure kids get to college. For example, nobody told me what Pell Grant was until the last semester of my senior year of high school. My AP Gov teacher had to tell me. And just to bring up some more stats, because you talked about your work with community colleges, Tacoma Community College, the one where a lot of people that I know from high school went to right after graduating, if they managed to, has a full-time retention rate of 62%, with a graduation rate at 27% and a transfer out rate at 20%. So they're graduating and transferring out less than half of their students. Not by much, but less than half. But I feel that's a gap that has to be picked up, because these are the places that students of color in particular are being served. So I have a two-part question for you. One, how specifically are we going to get the money into school districts like Tacoma Public Schools, into places like Seattle Public Schools, where you have schools like Garfield, which is considered, you have two high schools, one for white kids, one for students of color. How are we going to do that? And then secondly, how are we going to actually foster a community at the college level? Schools I'm at now, for example, I go to Evergreen State, and to even get to this point, I've had to take out massive student loans. Housing is virtually non-existent, especially at the community college level. Most of us have dealt with homelessness and being hungry while in college, and even before that. How are we going to fix these systemic problems that affect specifically communities of color, and how are we going to reach students of color on a cultural level? From your office, if you are elected to office, how do you plan to tackle those, especially because in Tacoma Public Schools, I don't think I had a teacher of color for any of my math, science, or English or literature classes. I had one teacher of color for band, I had one teacher of color for TV productions, and I had one in middle school to teach English, and that was it. How are we going to start filling those gaps and reaching those students who do need the two-pronged approach of someone who's both experienced poverty but also understands where they're coming from a cultural and racial background?
Yeah, excellent stuff. Let's start with your funding question. How do you do this? You got to get away from a system that makes the resources in a school a function of neighborhood property values. I know you've heard me say that, and I know Aaron is consistent with me on this issue, but it really matters. You have to begin to look at education funding formulas that drive disproportionate amounts of resource based on data like poverty, like graduation rates. The money has to follow the places where the need is the greatest, not just the places where the property values are the greatest. So it is not a small thing. You would be talking in a $9 billion a year budget system, potentially moving $500 million to $1 billion very differently and targeting that money very differently. That changes class size. That creates intervention specialists. That allows kids for recovery time during summer, where we lose so much summer learning loss, and we lose critical support systems. You've got to think about how many kids are on free and reduced price lunch or getting a breakfast right now through their school system that lose it for 10 or 12 weeks. So when we talk about shifting the money to communities in need, it's not just about saying, oh, we're going to get them more math, which is important. It's that increasingly the whole child is served by a comprehensive school system, and when it doesn't get resources, and when quite frankly it only operates for 9 months, some communities lose enormous opportunities. So that's the money question. How do we do this better? Our EOG bill, our Equal Opportunity Gap bill, really does begin to set the framework for recruiting teachers of color, bringing back conditional scholarship and grant programs so that there's a financial incentive to teach and to stay in teaching. But it also has cultural competence training across the staff. So everyone keeps thinking about this idea of, if we just keep recruiting teachers of color, eventually we'll be diverse enough, and eventually the system will look and produce and perform the way we want. That's never going to happen, to be honest with you, from a data standpoint. That's 50 or 60 years out. So we have to recruit teachers of color aggressively, but we also have to train and retrain the folks in the system today to think differently about poverty, about race, about religion, about our LGBTQ communities. It takes a huge investment of professional development to change the way educators see their students. And the tragedy of our funding crisis is a lot of the professional development that the state used to pay for is gone. It's gone. And so when you think about injustice and inequity, back to the funding question, well, who can still produce professional development in their school districts for their teachers and their staff? The districts who are the wealthiest, generating lots of local levy money. Who can do the least amount of professional development? The ones who are property poor, relying on levies that don't produce very much money. So that's an enormous part of this question. I want to bring another element of this in too, because I want to say to you, with all sort of passion that I have, whether folks understand this or not, The idea of recruiting diverse educators has been narrowly defined as a benefit for diverse students. That those students need to see people in front of their classroom who look like them to understand their pathway and what's possible and to connect to their learning. And every single bit about that is absolutely true. What is rarely talked about, and to me is equally powerful, is you have majority privileged populations in these communities, white kids, who have never had a staff member or a teacher of color. So not only do they go home to white parents in white communities in white neighborhoods, but their entire educational setting is full of white educators, white leaders, white school board members, white principals. So in fact, our communities of color are far more sophisticated in understanding cultural competency from multiple perspectives than our Caucasian students. We are creating a society of Caucasians and whites who have no exposure to equity and diversity. And so I'm trying to get people to kind of reshape the conversation. When we talk about recruiting teachers of color and diversifying our teaching core and our staff, it is not just about creating that opportunity for kids of color. It is about damn time that privileged kids, white kids, have a math teacher who is black and an English teacher who is Latina, and a social studies teacher who is tribal. This begins to really change things. And so let's have a bigger conversation about this, because I think we're missing the big conversation.
Well, I'd be happy to have a bigger conversation about that, especially as a student of color who's gone through these school districts, who I can count the number of my friends who've graduated college on one hand. And the vast majority of those students were white. So when you say that the privileged students need the exposure to teachers of color, I would argue that as a poor student of color, as someone who growing up in media, in my everyday life even, in my neighborhood, the idea was that you could not go to college, that black people, and I say this as a person of mixed ethnic background, that black people, Latinx people, that, Native people, we didn't get the chance to go to college. We couldn't do that. Our future was right there on the block. And because we didn't have teachers that reflected who we are, the diversity of our community, that idea was allowed to stick, where gangbangers and drug dealers that just litter our neighborhood become the only thing you see. That becomes the only thing you are able to aspire to. So I would very much argue against the idea that the premise that, well, sure, privileged kids can benefit from it. But I think that benefit right now needs to be seen first and foremost in the communities where it's going to do the most good. And I think in the communities that's going to do the most good in are the high minority areas, are at schools like Garfield, Mount Tahoma, Foss, Lincoln, Stadium. And for example, Lincoln has done a very good job of recruiting educators of color to better reflect their student population. And while Lincoln and Mount Tahoma historically have these, there's an idea attached to them that we're the worst high schools in Tacoma, and that, well, if you go to Mount Tahoma, you'd better expect to be in a fight, which in my experience was oftentimes true, where you code switched as soon as you left the classroom, and oftentimes even in the classroom, because if you didn't, you were likely to see the threat of violence, because we had nobody that looked like us to say, guess what, man, you can do better. So I would argue that we absolutely have to get teachers of color first and foremost to students of color, so that way we can raise the bar in our own communities and have someone that we can reach out to. That being said, specifically, my biggest question here is specifics on how exactly we move beyond a property tax funded educational system. What would you like to see? What would your ideal alternative be to property taxes? Because when you grow up in South Tacoma like I did, nobody owned property. I mean, the B&I is even starting to get run down. I mean, there was nothing there. So how do we transition from that, and what would you in particular like to see?
I would like to see us move to a system that is not local levy based. So I'm not saying you can abandon property tax. And by the way, low-income communities pay a ton of property tax that's passed through rentals. And so it is still a very regressive system on balance, even though it's better than some. So you got to move from local levies to state capacity and property tax. That does have the effect of shifting the tax burden to wealthier communities, but then the money goes out differently. When it is only a local levy system, unfortunately, your wealthiest communities get the most. And then I do believe our state needs a capital gains tax. You're one of only 9 states that does not tax short-term capital gains within your state. Idaho does it. Oregon does it. So the proposal we've had for the last 2 years puts in a tax rate of 7% or less. You'd still be below Idaho. You generate $1.5 billion a year. Less than 2% of Washingtonians would pay it. It's not on your income. It's not on your house. It's not on your farm. It's not on your retirement. It is literally the buying and selling of stocks and bonds. And if you were practically anywhere else in the United States, you would pay something. I think it's reasonable. It begins to move our state to a more progressive place. And so by shifting local levies to state property tax and adding a capital gains, we can get that $3.5 to $4 billion that is necessary to fully fund basic education. There's going to be more needed beyond that, but that is a practical solution to solve real problems today.
And Adair, and those were some excellent questions. I did want to kind of build off a little bit of what all of you talked about, and one of the things that came to my mind is regarding the diversity among staff members. And what comes to my mind as well is the need for diversity among the students. And so, as you're probably aware, that since the 60s in desegregation of schools, that there's been resegregating of schools going on in a variety of states, some worse than others, but Washington hasn't completely escaped that. There are some schools that are extremely heavily people of color, and the disproportionate realities of what that education looks like follows what you would expect economically. And what kind of solutions do we have to give people that kind of economic diversity in their classroom, so that they're not just surrounded with people on similar economics and similar economic situations as themselves, and without necessarily putting less wealthy kids in places where they would get ostracized for their lack of wealth. So you do it in a proportional way, or in such a way that it doesn't result in the students suffering as a result. That they're
so that is one of the most complicated questions I've heard, and it's a good one because it gets into huge issues like housing policy. I'm moving, guys, because I lost my, I'm about ready to lose my battery here, so hopefully you can still catch me here. So what can OSPI do about it, I think, is the question. What is the role of the state superintendent in this? And so part of that is really disaggregating the data and helping folks understand exactly what you've just identified. Understanding that we don't give kids a lot of choice. We don't give parents and communities a lot of choice about their schools. Even within their school district, they oftentimes cannot move to create a better opportunity or a more equitable system. So we should be looking at that. We should ask ourselves, what does that look like when we create schools that give kids opportunity, that, as you say, diversify economically students within a classroom and within a district? And then what's wrong with more mobility between districts? So before I would contemplate starting a charter school, for example, I would ask myself, why aren't we giving kids more opportunity to move within a district and between a district to go find what they believe is a better educational path for them that also has the benefit of creating more diversity within our classrooms and within our districts? I find it interesting that the voter numbers of charter schools, the highest turnout and the highest yes vote, came from communities that don't have charter schools. But we're very, very anxious to get them established in South King County. We have a big conversation we need to have here about this, and it's not happening, quite frankly, and I think your question gets at it.
And I'm really glad that you brought up the voter turnout, because that actually has a lot to do with one of the questions I had to do. It builds off of both what Adair said about preparing students for college. And I know the vast majority of the people that I know from my school that went on to college, most of them managed to get to a community college, and then when even they got there, they were either like 3.0 or better students, but they weren't meeting the basic requirements to get into college level math and English. So the school told them that they were getting a good education, that they were performing well, but then they get into a college situation, and the college is telling them, actually, you're not even where you're supposed to be after you finish high school, and you're going to also be sharing a classroom with 16-year-olds who have already learned that stuff that you weren't taught, and you're going to get a firsthand experience about how the education system has served you differently than this other group of students. And then the other part of that is, with voter participation, we had about 1 million people, a little over, vote in the superintendent race, and we'll probably expect several million people to participate in our November election, but several million more people aren't going to engage in the process. And I think a lot of that has to do with the role that our educational system plays in informing us about our civic duties, responsibilities, and opportunities. And so, what role do you see the superintendent being able to address kind of both sides of those, making sure that students in these underperforming schools aren't getting told that they're passing and that they should be ready for college, and then showing up at college and they're woefully unprepared and having to take additional loans out to pay for classes that aren't even actually college level, and then
Yeah.
getting people involved politically so that it's not just the people that want the charter schools in King County showing up at 80-90% of people that are making over $100,000, and people making under $20,000 are showing up at rates of 10, 15, 20, 30%. What role can the superintendent bend the educational curve to address those kinds of issues?
So let's start with your first question about remediation. So I've been very honored in the last 5 or 6 years to work on a project both in the college system and as a legislator that is first in the nation. We are the first state in the country to finally adopt an agreement between our college system and our high schools that says rather than the high school continuing to produce classes for students that get them graduated but somehow don't meet college entrance requirements and don't get them over placement tests, let's co-develop courses. These are in math and English language arts, and I think eventually will be in science, where high school instructors are meeting with college instructors. They are writing these courses. They're called Bridge to College courses. And our colleges have agreed that if the students will take those in their senior year and pass them, they will not only avoid a placement test in college, they will avoid remedial courses. You have highlighted the biggest sort of failure of our system is that we continue to tell kids, hey, you're graduated from high school, but you're still not college ready. And it's costing about $70 million a year in our state that we spend on remediation. I would argue about half of that is young people, traditional college-going students that we can avoid with these courses. There's another big chunk of it that's returning adults, 35 and 40-year-olds who have been displaced in manufacturing because of horrible trade agreements that come back to us, and they do need some remediation. They've been out of school for a while. They need a little bit of help. So we'll never totally get rid of the problem, but you've identified one of the great injustices of our system, and we are actually a state finally leading in that. We're bringing that to hundreds of high schools around the state. We've got about 6,000 or 7,000 students in those courses, and we're finally starting to see the benefit of that because kids are graduating not only with their high school diploma, but then they're walking into a college, and the college is saying, hey, no placement test, no remediation, you're straight into college. That's saving them financial aid. It's getting them through quicker. Community colleges are open-door institutions, and so a lot of people criticize their graduation rates. It's because we have, 55-year-olds who haven't been in school for 25 years who are not there to get an associate degree, but to get a technical course and then get back into the workforce. And so I'm always very leery of graduation statistics in community colleges nationally because in many cases that's only a subset of their students. In our state, only 40% of the enrollments are students intending to get associate degrees or transfer. Better than 60% of the students who are there are not there for that purpose. And so your point is well made. The earlier gentleman with his data, we've got to be really, really careful because we vilify a lot of kids who go to community college and a lot of students. And we tell them that's a lesser pathway, and in some cases we've got work to do. But for students who can make that their only affordable pathway, we should not make them feel like second-class citizens because they went to a community college by any stretch. Your second question was into so what is our civil obligation to get students to vote, and what does that conversation look like? I have said pretty clearly that we need to give local school districts a lot of flexibility and control and really examine where we give them mandates. But I will tell you that one of the mandates that I think we ought to have as a graduation requirement in social studies is that you register to vote or you pre-register to vote. We capture a lot of students in high school who are engaged. They are a part of our curriculum. They're civically engaged. It's a place where we're connecting with them. Then we send them on their way, and we rarely get some communities to come back and register to vote because it's kind of an archaic process in some ways. Maybe it's associated with your driver's license, and maybe you don't get connected there. But it makes no sense to me why we have high-stakes tests in English and math, but we can't ask students with an opt-out right to register to vote while they're leaving high school. I think it'd be a game changer. I think it would engage more young people. I think you would see the demographics changing. Because once you vote, we know that once you vote, you're more likely to keep voting. It's that when we never capture you, we never get your voice. So I think it's a big part of it. Let's be honest. There are also very clear efforts by some people in this state and around the country to oppress people and keep them from voting. So I'm a huge fan of pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. I'm a big fan of same-day registration. This is the fundamental sort of justice question about the democracy. Do we actually want people to control their own destiny in this place, or is it really the goal of some to keep the system only viable for those who already have resource and privilege? And that system today is being run and reinforced by those who only want that second outcome. So we got to do it differently.
Let me unmute myself here. Looks like Adair had another additional question he wanted to follow up with, so I'll let him get back in here, and then we'll go.
Yes. So you just mentioned that you want to be careful about using graduation rates from community colleges, and that's fine. As someone who went to a community college, I actually had to leave Tacoma Community College because I was unable to get the classes that I needed to because there was an emphasis on keeping students there, not an emphasis on getting students to graduate. There were less classes being offered. So at the time, I was a biology major, pre-med. Currently, I attend Evergreen State, and I'm dual majoring in both physics and biology. But while at the community college level, especially at Tacoma Community College, the school was more worried about building new buildings to attract new students and to keep milking the students they already had than they were interested in actually getting students to graduate. The idea that we can completely eschew graduation rates for schools like Tacoma Community College, which is a school that serves a large number of people of color, I don't think is very fair. I had to leave TCC, go to Seattle Central College before I could finally get a hold of the resources that I need, the classes that made it so that I could actually attend and then graduate. Not graduate, I had transferred as opposed to graduating out. Transfer to a 4-year institution, and even then, when I was looking at transferring, schools like UW, even UW-T and UW-Bothell, Wazoo, Eastern, Western, Central, there were students with incredibly high GPAs. I'm talking in the 3.5s, close to 4.0s, who were not getting into these schools because it was just too much. There was such a burden. So, my question here is, how do we hold community colleges accountable for the fact that they seem to be more interested in milking the students for every dime that they're good for? This is going to be 3 parts. Secondly, because we now have these bridge to college classes, how do we help those students, such as myself? I'm still at Evergreen State. I just transferred there last year, and I got accepted in August. How do you help students like myself who are worried about was my financial aid going to last me through the time that I need it to get a bachelor's of science? Personally, I'm getting a BA, BS, but still, a lot of us are worried about my financial aid is going to run out. A lot of us rely on that in order to be able to have to get housing. So how are we going to solve those 2 issues? And then thirdly, how are we going to improve community college? How are we going to make it so that it's not this factory of stagnation? Students that go to community college are absolutely bright and absolutely have the right to the best education they can get from there. And as someone who's experienced that, at least here in Washington State, I don't feel that's currently being served to us. So how would you fix that?
And importantly, I just want to add with Adair that I know at Pierce College there was also issues of them basically tailoring their class offerings to get the right amount of running start students as to not overserve them and start to cut down on the budget that they get from the state and otherwise for their running start students. And then also about closing certain important programs because they weren't as profitable for the community college. And I could have to dig up the reports, but reports in the school paper about the teachers being of the position that they were basically threatening them that if they didn't go quietly, that they would force their resignations essentially by cutting their programs. And so that if they didn't get on board with restructuring the programs as to be more profitable as opposed to being more to serve the community. So I just had to add that in. And then you'll have as much time as you're willing to stick with us to answer that. So
Okay.
I know that was a lot.
So there's a lot there, guys, and I hope I remember all the questions here. But I do want to say on the front end that the superintendent's office does not have jurisdiction over community and technical colleges. And so these are critical. I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability based on my experience in that system and how they connect. But you do have a state board for community and technical colleges that is in charge of that system, that policy, that money. But let's start with accountability for the college system. Part of this is getting the relationship right with K-12 through bridge courses, as we talked about, ensuring that financial aid is viable. We have the largest state need grant program in the country, but there's never enough we can do to help students get financial aid resources that last in the duration of their program, and particularly honoring the fact that when colleges and universities don't make capacity for students to complete their program on time because they won't provide the course offerings, that's not the fault of the student. When they hang out for a while and get a job part-time until the class pops up in the spring. We've got to make the pathways viable. The other thing I would say to Dare's first question, which I think is really powerful, what he's hit on accountability, is we're also one of the first college systems in the country in the last couple of years to finally move dollars from just funding inputs to funding performance. So our college system now has 5% of their money that they do not get unless they get students through that first math class, unless they get them through the first 15 credits, unless they get them a graduation or a degree or a transfer. And so we have slowly moved that system to an incentive-based system where we're taking care of the student is a bigger financial benefit, as you say, than sort of keeping students for as long as you can and getting as much tuition as you can. It's not a perfect system. It's got its own risks, but I think it's moving in the right direction. And I'd like to see all of our education systems at least contemplate some movement towards incentives, not punishing systems. Colorado tried that. It was a disaster. Florida tried that. It was bad. But actual incentive dollars on top of basic education as districts perform well and as colleges perform well, and then let them bargain it locally. I'm a huge fan of local collective bargaining, but let's figure out incentive systems so that the student comes first and not the business model. And I think that's what Adair was getting at. Adair, will you quickly restate your second question? Because that's really, your first one was on a kind of accountability of the colleges. What was your second one?
The second one is how do we reach the students such as myself who've been attending college for a number of years who are afraid our financial aid will run out because when we attended community college, we were unable to get the classes that we need based on the specific time or a lack of preparation that we got in high school, though we were told we would be ready for college after.
Yeah, I'd like to see our state move to a system that does not cap students by credits or time, but includes this variable of whether or not they could get the courses that they wanted, and create some accommodation for transfer. We have a good transfer system. We transfer something like 17,000 students a year. It's not perfect, though. And when those credits don't transfer effectively and when our universities don't take some things, that should not be the burden of the student. The financial aid should continue to flow to get them graduated on their path. So there are real policy moves there. Again, OSPI won't lead on that necessarily, but when you think about a whole child from birth to employment, I think it's a conversation that I get to have a little bit if I get there because I've been in that system. And I've seen it fail at times, and I've seen it succeed at times. So I think it's powerful.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely need the OSPI's voice in that conversation because they're going to, like, just with the bridge classes, they're going to be playing an important role in bridging the educational experience for those students so that we can help prevent the types of situations that Adair was mentioning in community college by making sure that they're prepared for their classes when they first get to college, and that the colleges are offering the schedules that are needed in order to fulfill the students' needs, not just to make the best bottom line or to fund the things that they're attempting to fund. And so with that, I just want to give you, we have our next guest coming up shortly, so I just want to give you an opportunity to go ahead and I want to thank you first for joining us, and then I just want, and answering all of our questions, you did great, and I'm really actually pretty excited about this race in that I feel like that this is how I would like more races to be, where I'm deciding about on which levels I relate more and on which things I think are more important, but that it's on large amounts of agreement on the goals and where we need to go. And so I look forward to having both you and Aaron back later in the race, and hopefully one of you as superintendent and as the other one as working closely together on really accomplishing these goals, because there's so much overlap. I wouldn't want the race to end up sending you guys in different directions, and because I really think it's really important. So hopefully that we're able to get all that together. And so go ahead and say your parting words for our viewers, and thank you again.
Hey, thanks again for the opportunity. It's incredible. This is sort of changing the game both in politics and education and social justice, and you guys are kind of leading the edge a little bit on this. I'm very proud that so much of this is centered in Washington State. My parting words are only that, as you indicated, there's two pretty, I think, hardworking and passionate people in this race, and I think voters have a really good choice. I have deficiencies that I will have to constantly work on, and should I get there, and hire folks that create a more complete team. But I also think that the role is really as chief executive officer. You got to know finance. You got to know the legislative strategy process. You got to know how to empower school districts with enough pressure to get student results and to get them to examine the gaps in our system, but with enough flexibility to let, Yakima be Yakima and Seattle be Seattle and Vancouver be Vancouver. They have different industries, different needs, different students. And so that's sort of the balance that I think I bring. As a kid who grew up in the state and attended public schools, I've touched the system, I've taught in the system, I've been a board member in the system. I've created policies that I think are really inclusive and targeted at populations who need financial assistance and who need support and are often marginalized and sometimes without voice. I've worked extremely well with our student associations to try to lift up their voice, both from a support system within the school, but financial aid in higher ed, and even, quite frankly, collective bargaining rights for our graduate students at the university level. So, I'm a born and raised progressive who just believes that we're a better state when we empower people and we focus on what our citizens need and not necessarily what our corporations need. We want great companies. I'm happy to have some great companies in the state, but increasingly this system is becoming a debate about which economic theory you propose in education, the privatization model or the public model, when the entire conversation ought to be what is best for students. How do we get students to achieve greater results? How do we support them better? And if that question is answered with private resources and private systems, then let's talk about it. But the first conversation should be about kids and not economic theories. And I unfortunately believe that this debate about charters and vouchers, privatizing our prison system, our highway system, our social safety net, it's all about an economic theory. And I think as progressives, we have a need to do something about this and bring light to this in a far bigger way than we have. Bernie did this. He gave us sort of that puff of air for a while. We have to sustain this at a national, state, and local level. And I'm glad to have brought those values to the race, win or lose. And should I win, you absolutely can count on some progressive values asking these hard questions. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris. I think Richard muted himself still.
Yeah, I'm good at that. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you again, Chris, from all of us at Project Sanity, those behind the scenes as well. Very appreciative of your time and your thoughtful answers. And so thank you again for joining us. Look forward to seeing you.
Keep up the great work, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Yeah, see ya. Excellent. All right, and so coming next, we're going to have Miguel from the pipeline, but first I just want to give Adair and Eric a brief opportunity to go ahead and respond and make sure that Dave's ready to queue up all our stuff as well. So go ahead, guys.
Yeah, I thought he had good answers. One thing that I wanted to comment on is I liked his idea about diversity in schools in a whole, but I think that it's something to work on down the road. I would agree with Adair on that one, that we need to do it in communities of color first so that they can see those role models and can have people to look up to. And I think Adair hit the nail on the head when he said, that way they can look at them and say, I can be that too. I think that was the right idea there. But I also agree that in the future we need to diversify the teaching staff in general. But it does have to be done, in my opinion, in diverse communities so that there are those examples and role models and people that they can see. Yeah, that was just my input on that. I also think we're a little spoiled that we have two progressive candidates, not only two Democratic candidates, even though it's technically a nonpartisan position, but two very progressive candidates that lean progressive. It's more than just, they're not corporate Democrats, it's two progressive Democrats. So
it feels like the total opposite of the national presidential race.
Yeah.
Where it's like, which one, where it's stabbed or hung or shot or whatever you want to, however you want to phrase it, versus it's like choosing which evil. This one, it's like, well, they're both great, It's just which one do I think is going to be more effective for the things that I think are most important.
Right.
But they're both on the same page as far as what things are on their important list.
Right. And I mean, I think he gave some. I think he gave some good answers. I think we would heartily disagree, at least on the premise, as we talked about earlier, as Eric just mentioned, the premise that white students need teachers of color. At least the way he was making it sound was right now, and I don't want to put those words in his mouth, but that's the way at least it came off to me as a student of color from these underserved areas. Like I said, the graduation statistics for Tacoma Public Schools in the year I graduated was 55.3%. Tacoma is the second largest city in Washington State, and we graduated barely half of our students. And a lot of that number of talking to teachers is that it was buoyed up by the people that came in as seniors. And they came in as seniors from schools like from up in Seattle, from up in Bellevue, from over in Puyallup and down in Olympia, came into the school district and graduated that year and buoyed those numbers. I mean, it was, quite frankly, the idea that any of us could go to college was shocking. You know, if you grow up and you don't see people that look like you as teachers, as doctors, as lawyers, as chefs, as anything other than some kind of negative stereotype or just the dudes on your block, you don't have a whole lot to aspire to most of the time. And we don't teach, a big reason why we need to have teachers of color is a lot of my teachers that were white from affluent middle-class neighborhoods who popped in and were getting their student loans forgiven because they were working in an underserved area. And another group who came in and had this white savior mentality, well, I'll go in here and fix all these poor ghetto kids and, you know, they're going to get to college. The teachers that had the most impact on my life grew up in Chicago, grew up in the South. These were two black teachers, and one from right here in Tacoma, Washington, who happened to be white. He went to Lincoln High School, my high school's rival. But he grew up in Tacoma. He grew up on the east side. He grew up in the midst of that violence and understood that this is what these students need. And I think that's just as important as getting teachers of color, is getting teachers from the area in which we are serving students, or an area very similar.
Yeah, and when it's not just that they're of color necessarily, though, it's also about the various cultural backgrounds that come along with it.
Right.
And so oftentimes what you'll end up having is a lot of people that were basically culturally raised as white as they could be, but they're of color, and then they end up in positions representing people of color, and they still lack that ability to connect because they were affluent or the variety of other aspects that contribute towards separating that feeling from the students in these especially rough circumstances.
Absolutely.
And so with that, I want to go ahead and get Miguel in. And Eric, I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce Miguel, or
Yeah.
So we'll let Dave go ahead and get a chance to get everything prepped there for us.
Yeah. So we're bringing Miguel on here, and he had hit me up, and his last name is Moya. He had hit me up, I believe it was about a week ago, and well, actually I saw a Facebook post first, and Miguel and I had just connected. He has kind of started getting into citizen journalism on his own, and so we had kind of connected, and we have sat down once and kind of talked about our ideas. And so he had put out a post that said, "Hey, I'm heading to North Dakota to the pipeline. Who wants to come?" And so instantly I was going to try to figure out a way that I could go out there too, but it just didn't line up for me. And Miguel is out there doing a great thing right now, and I talked to him last night, and he had only planned on originally staying for a few days, and he has decided to kind of stay there indefinitely for the time being, because he feels like that it's something that he needs to stay out there and fight for. So I hope that in the future we'll be able to bring him on again. I know we have some videos from out at the pipeline also that Dave might, I believe, will be showing in a few moments as well. But in a few seconds here, we'll get Miguel up to kind of just, talk about. Oh, do we got the video now? It looks like we might have it. Oh, or we can go to Miguel first. All right. So the first video here. So this is Miguel's footage. Democracy Now! Actually showed footage, and a few other shows have, of a man chained to an excavator and the police actually sawing the handcuffs off. And this is Miguel's viewpoint of that same situation, and he's about 50 feet away, and there's cops blocking everything. And so here's his viewpoint from that same scenario, and we'll take a look at that real quick. All right, so that was the video that Miguel took of the man chained to the excavator. And so Miguel, can you just, first of all, we'll get into some more general questions later, but if you want to talk about that specific video and kind of what you saw during that incident and how you felt like the police treated everyone, including the man that was chained to the excavator. And I will point out that we made a lower third for Miguel right before the show, so his name is actually spelled M-O-Y-A for all of you that are curious. All right, so Dave's a boss in the back room back there, so he's going to get it fixed for us.
Can you hear me all right?
But Miguel, yeah, if you want to go ahead and describe how that scene felt and the energy you felt and how the police treated everybody, just let us know.
Well, I'll talk about as much as I have video to really back up my story, but I drove up yesterday to the site where I heard there was another kind of blockade direct action happening, and after a few different interactions with police who, some of them were helpful, guiding me towards where I was supposed to go. Some of them were kind of like diverting me in the wrong direction, actually. But I got to the site, and as always, the police were as kind of like politely interfering with me as they could, and so they did a pretty good job of trying to block my view of the direct action taking place, and so I had to try my best to kind of get around them. I'm not really sure what the law says, but when I showed up, it didn't really seem like anybody was really directly observing the person who was locked up. There was nobody really observing or protecting them there to do any accountability. There was no media nearby them for a while. And the police successfully really blocked off the media and all of the protesters for a long time, and so that was concerning. They also, they told me that I had to leave my car several hundred yards away from the area for my own safety, which I didn't really understand. I felt much less safe because of that, but I wasn't going to ask any questions. But yeah, if you have more specific questions, they gave me a little bit of attitude at some points, but you know how it is, I think, right?
yeah, no, I definitely do. They definitely try to act like they're your friend, but it's very obvious that they are not 90% of the time.
Yeah, I really don't know how legal it is for them to be blocking like the press. I feel like that's like a First Amendment free speech right, and it's for people's protection that we have cameras. So if they're not into that, it makes me concerned. But in any case, there's plenty else to talk about besides the cops.
Yeah. So What made you decide to go out to the Dakota Pipeline? What made you wake up and go, let's go, I need to get out there, I need to cover this?
Well, I've known for a long time that mainstream media is very dysfunctional, despite its shiny exterior. And really, I'm just at a place in my life where I'm able to make sacrifices and stuff like that. And I decided that, with other people as my heroes and examples, one guy in particular, this guy Michael Bautista, he's the guy who got the live stream footage of the Dallas sniper a couple months ago. But his bravery and presence at that scene was instrumental in informing the world about what happened there. And he was able to, basically do a very good deed in a very sudden and succinct way. I was just inspired by other people doing live streaming and stuff like that. I had the time, and I knew that I could give a good report back, probably better than what would come from mainstream media sources. My plan was to spend several days there and get to know people and really get like the larger context of what was going on. And really, just deeply connect instead of make a dollar off of a story, so to speak. I'm out here, I'm not getting paid or anything like that. I love native cultures of all kinds, indigenous cultures of all kinds, and feel very strongly about preserving culture on this planet everywhere, as well as protecting water. It just seemed like the right thing to do, so I went for it. It seemed it honestly, it felt like a risk coming out here. I drove out here by myself. This is easily the best decision I've made in my life, for sure. And I can talk about why, later. But I'm sure you have other questions too. That's why I went out here, though. Just felt called,
Yeah, no, I admire your humbleness, and I really respect what you have done. I think it's amazing, and I remember when I called and talked to you, it blew me away the way that you just so sincerely and genuinely had told me, like, I really think I need to just stay out here more, so I'm going to be out here longer. When I called you last night, actually, and I was like, hey, how long are you going to be there? And you said, I decided I'm going to stay pretty much as long as I feel like I can help. And so I just want to say thank you for that, because what you're doing,
fun.
Yeah, is an amazing thing. And this is kind of a general question, so I apologize because we were talking about detailed questions. But if you could talk about just your experience as a whole while you're out there, the types of people you've been meeting, the overall feeling. Is it a feeling of hope? Is it a feeling of despair? What are the type of feelings that are going on out there?
Well, the situation literally is that, many people have come together in an improvised way by the thousands to stop a pipeline project that will very, very likely poison millions of people. And they're having a difficult time getting traction, attention from the media and from the general public. And, just that in and of itself, in my opinion, is crazy.
What would be what would be some ways that you think we could bring attention to what's going on out there? Do you think sharing videos is enough? Do you think we should be contacting our congressmen and stuff like that? What do you think would be the most help?
Well, this isn't the first pipeline.
Yeah.
This isn't the first environmental, threat or situation like this. And, our connection cut out a little bit while you were speaking, but one of the things you mentioned was reaching out to congressional representatives or something like that.
Yeah.
And those things are, I guess they're tried and true. But I believe in, and I don't really know necessarily what this means, I believe in creative approaches and experimental approaches. and that if you want results and progress that you have never seen, you have to do things that you've never done. So I'm trying my best to take different approaches with reporting. I'll be live streaming a lot from the big camp there, and trying to unify and organize the independent journalists who are there, living and camping there. And I don't really have any solutions, but just the reality of it is there are trillion-dollar industries and investments that are adding inertia, momentum, what have you, to this. And well, any effort is, at this resistance is good. There are no. I mean, we have to try everything. I think that might be true.
So we talked earlier today about a couple things, and one thing we talked about was the possibility of some kind of general place to source videos from the protests and give kind of a platform that was a centralized location that people from the outside, here in Washington, out in New York City, wherever they may be, could possibly share the videos. Do we know if something like that is going to happen?
Yeah, I just purchased the domain name half an hour ago or so, maybe an hour ago. It's called waterprotectornews.com. And after discussing it with a couple people, I was going to call it pipelineprotestnews.com, but the elders and the organizers, specifically like the Sioux chiefs, are not referring to this as a protest, and they don't like that language. They're here to protect the water. Nothing more, nothing less. And so that's why it will be called that, is waterprotectornews.com. And there are other actions going on in other places to stop this pipeline. And so we'll be featuring news from other states, other actions as well, not just the North Dakota action here.
Yeah, I actually would love. I have some footage from an action that took place in Olympia, and so I'll get with you later. I would love to get some of that footage on there as well.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's a good friend of mine. They're doing an involvement for water thing here in Washington around different areas, and so that's another thing that viewers should look out for. Really quick before we head out, a big thing that we're working on and is Miguel is going to hopefully bring footage from the Dakota pipeline to us the next few days, and we're going to try to get that all out so you guys can see what's going on there. And also the waterprotectornews.com, is that right? That's what it was?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going to try to get those videos up to, and hopefully we can have some of this exclusive content for you so that you guys can share it out and really raise awareness about this, because this is something, like Miguel has been saying, that there needs to be more attention brought to. And I like what you had mentioned about how, as like I brought this up earlier, Dave likes to say the original Americans, they don't see this as a protest. They see this as protecting their land, because as the government, the United States, has continuously tried to take their land. We took this from them in the beginning, and we gave them these little sections, and now we try to take over these little sections and pollute these little sections that we've given them, and it's just not fair, and we need to stand up for them. So I like that. I like that this is not an act of protest, this is an act of protect. And so thanks for really bringing that to light. We're going to be touching base with Miguel the next few days. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say in closing besides goodbye, but
thank you for working to protect the water and spread this news and knowledge. I'll do my best to always tell you only what's absolutely true. And thanks for having me on the show. I look forward to working together much more.
Cool. Thanks, Miguel. We'll definitely be talking to you soon.
Thank you so much, Miguel, for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Anytime. Take care.
It was an excellent job there, Eric, and that's great to hear from Miguel. That was very informative and interesting, and I think as you mentioned, it is important to highlight that they see this as an action of protecting something that they see as both, intrinsically important to survival, but also as something that has a higher spiritual value and has even a very significant value to them beyond just the resource that we view it as. And I think it's easy for us to get caught up in the language that we typically use to describe these types of situations, with like using the word protest, when I think this is a very accurate example of protecting.
Mhm.
And so, with that, I think we should mention you've been watching Project Sanity either on projectsanity.org or Project Sanity's YouTube channel, or you've been watching us on the Benjamin Dixon channel. Either way, please hit the subscribe button. That should be down there. Yeah, I think that's about where it's at. Over there, please click that, and thank you all that have shared or been contributing in chat. I noticed Adair's been talking a lot in chat there, and we haven't been following back or getting in touch with you guys as much as I'd usually like, but please stay engaged. Thank you so much for doing that. Benjamin will be on in just about a half hour and with much more of the news headlines. Today we've been taking a look at some local educational race, the local educational race. We looked at the pipeline, and I think now we're going to go ahead and expand out a little bit to the national presidential race with some stuff that we've had from Jill Stein yesterday in California. If before we go to that, if Adair or Eric, you had anything else you wanted to mention about some of the previous stuff that we've covered before, while Dave gets the I think the indigenous, or do we want to start with the quick clip or the indigenous person's clip? I'll let Dave decide. All right.
Oh, Dave. Well, so they don't know why we're laughing then, Dave.
Right. That's right.
Like
You,
crazy
you look
people.
like crazy people. You're just cracking up. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I said.
So the producer is talking to us, and you guys can't hear, but he made us laugh.
I'll say it again. We're gonna go with the long tape, the long video, because I gotta pee.
So Dave back there working the control room. So we're going to go ahead. There was a great question asked of Jill Stein at her appearance in California from a Native American, I believe, Shannon Rivers. And so we'll go ahead and play that clip, and you'll get to hear the question and the response. I think it's appropriate, as we've been talking quite a bit about indigenous issues this particular episode. So go ahead when you're ready, Dan.
Good afternoon, Dr. Stein. My name is Shannon Rivers. I'm Akamir from a place you guys call Arizona. There's a lot of issues and struggles that go on in indigenous communities. We are right now on the Tongva territory. Now it's called Los Angeles. But there's so many issues that go on in Indian country. And right now we have the Dakota Access Pipeline that's happening in the north. And we see our people being arrested constantly for protecting what they believe is their right, their human right. First of all, their human right. Then we look at the south, my place where I come from, the border issues, where we have in one of our communities, one of our reservations, we have about 40,000 Department of Homeland and Border Patrol vehicles just patrolling that whole area, terrorizing the people and destroying the land, the flora and the fauna. So we here, my nephew and I, our families, we live here in Los Angeles now, only for a little while. We want to go back to our communities, and we will. But we hear a lot of our white brothers and sisters talk about environment, about how to change this American society. We hear this talk constantly, right? We hear the issues. But what we see as our right, is our innate right, our inherent right, whether it's regards to treaties, whether it's regards to human rights, international laws and policies that have been in place for a long time, even laws that have been adopted by this Congress or by this member state here of the UN. What is your idea, your thoughts? I know you mentioned calling to a hearing, but we've had hearings, whether it was through the Department of Interior or Bureau of Indian Affairs, we've had hearings. But we still see these ongoing violations of indigenous people's rights within this territory. or within these territories and within these boundaries of what America calls its boundaries. We would like to see something more than just a reconciliation. We need to see the honoring of the original treaty territorial boundaries, not just standing alone, because that's a reservation. But we're talking 1868 treaties, 1851 treaties, the treaties of Gaston Purchase and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that have violated indigenous peoples constantly. This is a heavy question, and it's very difficult for most people, especially Americans, to answer, because even those that run for office still have this idea of what America should be and looks like. But we constantly see these human rights violations on indigenous peoples. They are the ones getting arrested. They are the ones with high per capita murder and incarceration. We see these constantly. We see it all the time. How would you address these issues? And I know that's a big question, but we hear the constant rhetoric by people who run for this American office. And how do you recognize that this is stolen land? Not just reparations, but honoring those rights and honoring the rights to free, prior, and informed consent, honoring the rights of free mobility of indigenous peoples in the territories. How do you see yourself as a candidate, doctor, to address these issues? And I appreciate you for giving us the time, me and my nephew standing here, and our people, the people. We don't represent all indigenous people, but we represent the voice of indigenous people. And I appreciate that.
Thank you. I want to honor everything you're saying and recognize that we owe so much to the indigenous nations for leading the way in our struggle against climate catastrophe. That it is our indigenous brothers and sisters standing up to defend their land and their water and your treaty rights, and to stop pipelines, and to stop the uranium mines, and to stop coal plants and excavation. Protecting your rights is critical to all of our survival, not just on climate, but also in protecting our waters, in protecting us from radioactive waste and the cycle of nuclear power that begins in indigenous lands with the mining of uranium. And I think it's been so important for us to be listening to what the indigenous communities are teaching us about Mother Earth, about the importance of treaty rights, and the importance of taking all of these steps to shut down the continued extraction, excavation, the raping of our lands, our mountains, our deserts, that is creating this crisis that we're all facing. And I think we have been educated in the white community, in the environmental community. We have benefited so much from the examples of courage of the indigenous people who faced down, for example, the Keystone Pipeline. Again, the Dakota nations who created encampments along the path of that pipeline and said, this is where we will live and this is where we will die. We are not moving. And that courage, I think, inspired everyone. It inspired an entire climate justice movement. And I think that inspiration continues. The fight becomes more desperate all the time, as we're witnessing now in North Dakota, where the government has sued to try to stop the protests, and there will be a case in court. I know today the temporary injunction against the pipeline was declared illegal. So there's been a small legal victory right now. I'm sorry, declaring the protest illegal. That has been defeated. So for now, the protest is legal. There's another legal challenge. Another legal challenge that will have to be faced at the end of the next week. So it's an ongoing struggle, and I can only say that it's a struggle I've been very committed to myself, to supporting the leadership of the indigenous communities, whether in the Dakotas or in Wisconsin, where the fight is against the sand mines, for the fracking and the mineral mines, the metal mines. I think it's copper. I'm not sure which one it is. But this is going on all over, and it's indigenous people who are being poisoned and whose land and water is being stolen. So all I can say is that I think we need to keep building this alliance, keep educating the public who's come to understand that they are very much at risk here, and for us to keep lifting up the struggle of indigenous people here and all over the world who really are the caretakers of our natural world, of Mother Earth, and for people to understand that if we are going to have a Mother Earth, we need to have the protections for the indigenous people who are the caretakers of Mother Earth for us all.
And that was the video from Jill Stein answering a question from a Native American while at her appearance in LA. And so with that, I'll go ahead and bring in the panel, and we can discuss what we saw there. We have about 15 minutes left, give or take. So fit in whatever other footage we'd like, and then we can plug it if we don't cover it, and then just talk about our show so far today.
Thanks for reminding me of the time, because I lose track of that. And then Grossman jumps in and he says, "Hey, TikTok guys, what's going on? Wrap it up."
Yes, we have Ben coming on in just about 20 minutes, so we just got to make sure we're off and let them get everything set up in time. So
right. So yeah, so that was I of course went to the Jill Stein campaign is sort of a run and gun operation along the same lines as we are, and they don't they use press releases sort of after the fact, and they posted that this event at Johnny's Coffee Shop, which is an iconic coffee shop here in Los Angeles. It's not open anymore. It's used for filming. It's used for among other things, it was the Bernie's the last few months as the headquarters for Bernie Sanders here in Los Angeles. It's literally in the center of Los Angeles, and the campaign it's basically put out a Facebook event. That's the only place they put it, and within hours they had a large room, as you can still see in more video that you can watch. Over 100 people there that just showed up. About 20 Bernie delegates from all over the state of California. One that drove 5 hours to get there. As soon as he saw the event, he got in the car. As you saw there, Shannon Rivers, a American First Americans activist there, and I found it to be an excellent question. He also asked about Leonard Peltier, the political prisoner, and Jill Stein, of course, supported his release as far back as 2012 was on the record. So I found that to be part of. They basically, I showed up. I thought I was going to be there in plenty of time. It was billed at 7:30, and I rolled up at 6:30, and she was already talking. So she basically spent about 4 or 5 hours there at Johnny's. And met a lot of people and talked to the press that were there, which included us, Project Sanity, of course. That's right. And TYT, Jimmy Dore, did show up. He was streaming it, and then he got a question in. And then the Pasadena Public Access Station and another website, which I haven't quite checked out yet. But that was it as far as press for this event. So obviously the press does not monitor Facebook events for coverage of Jill Stein. But it was actually pretty impressive and a really good event. There was a lot of art and a call for more art for Jill, and it really kind of was a handing off of the torch really from the Bernie people that were supporting and using that space to Jill Stein. We were trying to come up with a name. It was Johnny's, Bernie's. I think Java Jill's, I think, is a good name for the place now. I'm gonna try to lobby for that. But it was a really good event, and of course we got we made another appearance with Jill Stein. We've been stalking Stein all over the country, in Philadelphia, and we continue to do that, which is part of what's going on with Miguel, which is pretty exciting. He's going to be helping us out there in North Dakota to help gaff and sort of coordinate Jill's visit with the rest of the independent media. So that's pretty exciting. Thank you, Eric, for the hookup. Seems like a real upright guy.
Well, why don't we talk more about that real quick?
Please.
I guess I can. Whatever. So
sure. Yeah. Well, you got the lowdown, right?
Well, so do you, Mr. Dave.
Well, yeah. We're working together. We're all working together.
So basically, Dave left the event last night, and, as he said, we've kind of been stalking Jill Stein, like, everywhere. Like, literally thinking that I might have to go leave to stalk her. Just kidding. So they had asked us, because they didn't really have as Miguel was pointing out, there's no big media that's at the pipeline, really. They'll go there and take 20 seconds of footage to say that they were there and then leave. And so basically the Stein campaign asked Mr. Dave, hey, do you guys have a connection down there? We'd like someone that could help us with some Wi-Fi coverage, with some cell phone coverage, with some sort of a media tent. And so it's not even been 24 hours. It's probably been more like 18 hours. Miguel has actually been doing a great job of he's organizing all the independent media people there. He's creating a media tent for the Stein campaign when they get there. He's talking to the Native American leaders to see how they feel about her visit and what they feel comfortable her doing while she's there so that he can better communicate that to the Stein campaign. And he's going to meet them at the airport so he can kind of be a guide to bring them to the airport. So, yeah, we're going to have the exclusive coverage of that. And just kind of bouncing off of that real quick, I had a question, Aaron, Dave, these guys right here above me, raise the roof. So you guys have both got to meet, I don't know if Adair's listening, maybe he is, but you guys have actually both got to meet Jill Stein. And one of the kind of attacks I hear on her that from watching her, I don't get the sense that this is it, but Bill Mayer says this, Tom Hartman says this. They're kind of trying to attack her as a vanity candidate, that she's just in it and she's not genuine, that she just wants the attention. You guys have met on one. I feel like both of you are good judges of character. How do you feel about those comments?
I'm sort of still on the fence. Now, I did meet her last night. Let me tell you, that woman is in shape. I mean, she's maybe a doctor. Again, I see doctors and nurses that are fat. So I immediately walk out of the room when my doctor is fat. So, she's doing something right because that woman is in shape. She's like svelte and, she's healthy. So, a vanity candidate. She pops up every 4 years and runs. If you want to call it that. I mean, she was the candidate in 2012. That was the first time, I believe. But I agree with the idea that the Greens need to be more, more influential on all levels of government, whether it be federal, state, or local. And I think that's part of what needs to happen over the next 2 cycles. And now, a few folks are saying, and I kind of agree with this analysis, is that what they're really doing is getting her. We want to get her up to 5% in the national polls in this race, so that she can get matching funds in the next race. So this will pop up again in another 4 years, folks. So you can look forward to that and her vanity. But hopefully between now and then, we can get some Greens in office. Maybe get some folks running as Greens as opposed to Democrats. Maybe this whole coalition building idea. But as far as her just doing it, she's, it's kind of like Bernie, she's been involved in this stuff, like she says with the Native Americans, with the indigenous rights, she's been involved for a long time. I think the whole science thing has been debunked. She's written 2 excellent scientific journals or books, and, you have to take things in context. I think that, so what if she comes around every 4 years? She's getting our message out every 4 years, which is quite helpful. So I think there's no reason why this energy that was created in our revolution with Bernie Sanders can't jump on the exact same platform, and even more so, more of the platform that we have as progressives. I mean, I'm a Green. I voted for Nader. I voted for Jill Stein in 2012. You know, in full disclosure, I created this problem with George Bush. So, you know, we're going to do it again. Damn it. But, you know, if we want to watch just like the 3-minute little video, there's a great little quip in there about how one of the organizers from California for Progress, which basically is just moving its energy over to Jill Stein, talking about how Bernie has basically set this up, you know, and now what do we do? It's up to us. And where do we go with that energy? And it's obvious that these guys that are involved here are going to put where they're going to put their energy, you know. So I don't know, Adair, what do you think?
I can see why people are like, well, she just pops up to get media recognition. Well, she kind of has no choice. Yeah. Like, let's be realistic about this. The media absolutely refuses to cover the Green Party. Anybody that doesn't have a D or an R next to their name when they're running for office does not get coverage by the media. Having sat down and talked with the woman, she's incredibly smart, incredibly passionate about what she's doing, and I feel she's quite genuine about honestly trying to run for office. She's not the political opportunist people make her out to be. When I had the chance to sit down with her in Philadelphia, she'd been running from event to event to event to event to event the entire time as the DNC is going out. And when I say event from event, I mean from protest to protest to protest, to stand out there on the front lines with the people she wants to support. I mean, the woman went to the projects in Baltimore, for Christ's sake. If that doesn't show you commitment to a cause, when you're an older white woman walking around the projects in a city like Baltimore, I don't know what shows that level of devotion.
That's true.
Genuine. She's a very genuine candidate, a very genuine person. When I was able to interview her and we had a few minutes, she actually told her campaign staff, like, well, hold on a minute, I'm going to give a more clear, concise, and detailed answer to this question. And I asked, you know, the regular Black Lives Matter type questions, et cetera, that I had ever gotten from that I think we've ever gotten from anybody as long as we've been working together.
Well, certainly the questions I got to her, she was right on. You know, she knew exactly what she was talking about. Very connects with everybody she's talking to. It was a great setup last night, how they were, they were getting pictures with the public and the press were waiting, you know, they were mixing it up. And even my buddy Alan Minsky, he was like, come on, give the people a chance, you know. So, I think she's very genuine. My wife, her first observation was, ooh, look, a handmade banner. You know, it's a hand-painted banner she's traveling around. And she got an Aluber when she was done. You know what a Luber is, right? That's a guy who does a Lyft and an Uber.
Okay, I thought this was.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was
totally different. And I was just thinking to myself, that is not a job that I want.
It's the new economy. It's the sharing economy. It's when you can't get a real job and you get fined 2 fake jobs.
It sounds like
driving your car around.
Like the new economy. It's really the sharing economy.
Yeah, there are other. And unfortunately, I didn't get footage of it. But yeah, it was like Mel was like, when the car's here, we're out. Let's go.
Right.
I get the impression that if she's faking it, she's faking it better than a lot of people are sincerely doing it.
Yes,
right. So, and to be fair to Mel, we do love Mel, but Mel, and she's got a very tough job keeping Dr. Jill on track, because Dr. Jill really wants to sit down and talk to everybody. She really wants to get to know you and your concerns, and deeply. And when I was there, I was there with 4 of the delegates who had nothing to do with us, who just were going to be there to hold the phone so I could film this interview, took the time to shake all of their hands and sincerely thank them for doing what they did, and called them the revolution and said that, you know, after this convention, I really will need your help and I really would love to work with you guys. I mean, absolutely amazing. Mel, however, had to do the unfavorable part of the job and be like, no, we've really got to go. There's a protest, and we said we would be there. We're going to honor that commitment.
Well, and Dave pointed out earlier when we were talking in our production meeting about the fact that she's also a fabulous singer and guitar player.
Her voice, she's got a great voice. She does. I mean, I think every progressive candidate, it's a requirement they have to be in a folk band at some point. I
was not in a folk band, but you know, I did do music.
Music, yeah. She loves the alliteration. You know, it's people and peace over profits. You know, I mean, you can tell she's very, she likes the poetry of linguistics, you know, of her prose, the poetry of her prose, it were. She got a couple of buzzwords. You know, she had some rally cries and hashtags. Everybody was coming up with hashtags. I forget what they were. But the whole video is up there. You can watch the whole stream. I streamed the entire event once I landed. The first part was a Periscope. The second part I got on my channel. So I got the, you know, pretty much her stump speech, along with some great artistic endeavors, a great rap song by someone you follow, Richard.
Yes, Core Element.
Core Element. So yeah, he was great. We were talking to Chella, and I were talking to him, and Chella was saying, you know, I miss protest rap. Michael Franti's sold out and does love songs now. You know?
And so with that, I think we're going to try and get this clip of Jill, and I think Core, you mentioned, is in it a bit. So we'll get that out, and we'll go out with that. We'll call it an extended moment of sanity. Short on time, but so in order to get that clip out, I'll just say thank you guys all for watching, subscribing, sharing, being a part of the conversation, and getting engaged in your communities. And with that, I'll say good night and enjoy this clip that we have here. Thank you.
Was by bringing in new parties. And I don't know if you do a little research, you'll find videos of him talking about that. So when you look at what he's talked about, and when you look at the fact that he said this whole, and I very, very strongly and very, very firmly believe that what is right for ourselves, what is right for each other, what is right for this nation, and what is right for our planet is throwing all of our energy, all of our support, everything that we have behind our candidate, Jill Stein.
As Yane was saying, you know, this is not a discretionary election. This is not about the kind of a world we might be. This is whether we are going to have a world or not going forward in the future. And I just want to say I'm like so overwhelmed looking around at this room. I can't believe how beautiful you all are and how powerful we all are. This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
This is a realignment election. Not only are we facing, you know, the biggest crisis that I think humanity has ever faced, the climate crisis, these endless expanding wars, the economic elite that has our economy and our democracy by the throat, the nuclear arms race, which has heated up again. Maybe it's hotter than it's ever been. We've got the Cuba missile crisis on steroids right now, but it's not in Cuba. It's on the border of Russia right now. We've got 2,000 nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert, and Hillary Clinton wants to start an air war with Russia over Syria. We say, we don't need those friggin' wars, and we don't need those friggin' walls.
It sounds like something I would love to do. The devil's always in the details of the scheduling, but in principle, I think the idea of a digital debate is fabulous. And yes, if the candidates who are actually on the ballot, and for enough voters that they could win the election, are in this debate, this is exactly the debate that we need to have in as many formats as possible. You know, the Republicans had a gazillion debates, you know, and the Democrats did in 2012 as well. The American people desperately need real information now about what their choices are, because they have rejected the two choices that they are being force-fed. So let's let them hear about what their real choices are.
What do we do now that we found out that we've been hypnotized Exodus on the DNC like Jews from Egypt? I refuse to fall in line. Fall in line. You don't give my vote because I'm voting for you. No more debates voting for the lesser of two evils. I'm going green and bring the power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. I'm going green and bring the power to the people.